When it comes to the big hitters of 80s toy lines, to me there are five. Now, some might argue a few more into the discussion, and that's fair, but there are five I think we can all agree upon. Five action figure lines that reigned supreme in the 80s, and that collectors, they're rabid for them. Now, we've talked about a few here already on the show, and eventually we're going to hit the rest of those, but today on Rewind Toys, we're going to take a look at the toy line that changed everything, the line that became and continues to be a pop culture juggernaut. Today, we're telling you the history of the Transformers. Jason Emmett here, and man, am I excited to get into this one. The Transformers were a line I was obsessed with as a kid, as I'm sure a lot of you are as well. And it's a property I still love today. Now, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Motu, there's a lot going on with this line, and we couldn't possibly hit even close to all of it in one episode. So we're going to focus on 1984 through 1990, the era of Generation 1, or as we collectors call it, G1 Transformers. So it's 1983, and the Hasbro toy execs are visiting the Tokyo Toy Show, and they're on the lookout for something cool, something really unique they can bring back to the U.S. market. As fate would have it, this day, they would find exactly that. Now first, I think we need to do a little time traveling. So Takara Toys of Japan launched in 1955, and originally they focused on, we'll say, more traditional toys like dolls and board games and things like that. Then in 1974, they would release two toy lines, Microman Micro Change and Diaclone. Now Microman were a series of 3 3/4 inch figures that with accompanying vehicles, robots, playsets, accessories, things like that. The idea behind them were that they were actual cybernetic beings disguised as toys while on Earth. That idea would remain an important influence on the Transformers line as well, that disguised bit. Now, we should also mention that in the Microman series, there were several sub-series. One of these sub-series was Micro Change. Now, these Micro Change figures would become the basis for our Transformers. I want to go on a wee small tangent here. You might not know the Microman figures, or maybe they look really familiar, as they would go on to become Micronauts. But you may recognize some of their vehicles, and that's all well and good, but I really dig the Microman figures. These things are awesome, and I want them all, but I digress. So the second line we mentioned, Diaclone. These were transforming vehicles and robots that were piloted by miniature figures. These weren't meant to be actual size like the Microman were. They represented scaled-down versions of real robots and real vehicles. Now, the initial line was created by Shoji Kawamori and Kazutaka Miyatake. And if we have any Macross fans out there, you might recognize these names, as they would eventually go on to create the Macross line as well. So in 1982, a man named Ono Kojin would add his stamp to the line by introducing car robots, which were robots that could change into, well, cars. Obviously, it's right there in the name. And now we can move forward once again to that toy show in 1983. So Hasbro sees these two lines, and they were like, oh, hey, these are really boss. It was the 80s, so words like boss were a thing. Hey, these are really boss. We should totally buy the licensing for these and sell them to kids in America. And they were right. They totally should have, and they totally did. But they knew they didn't want to go with two separate storylines, and instead they decided to combine both into one big happy Brady Bunch transforming family. But where to start? How do you make these two lines make sense to American kids? So first came the name. They were robots that transform, so why not Transformers? Attaway, keep it simple, guys. I like it. Next came the characters themselves. They originally had names like Battle Convoy. That would be Optimus Prime. Police Car Fairlady. Prowl. Porsche 935 Turbo. Jazz. Countach LP 500S Super Tuning. Sunstreak. Way easier. For this, Hasbro reaches out to the gang at Marvel, which is brilliant because Marvel could give these guys a backstory and names kids could latch onto. After all, they'd been doing that very thing for years. So, two big names here, Jim Shooter and Dennis O'Neil. It was on these two to come up with the lore behind the story. These are the dudes who came up with Cybertron and Energon and the entire reason for why the Transformers were on Earth. Next, we have Bob Budiansky, a writer at Marvel tasked with coming up with names. First, he has a basic story, and he has the two factions dubbed the Autobots and Decepticons because, well, the OG good guys were cars and bad guys were deceptive. I guess it works, right? According to Budiansky, he had a weekend to come up with like 26 initial names. Sitting at his desk with the figures in front of him, he began jotting down ideas on a yellow legal pad until he had a list he could present. We've all heard the stories that some of these names were questionable at best, but in the end, they picked the names that seemed to fit. After that, a massively cool ad campaign was launched, a badass jingle was created, and a comic book line was about to hit the rack. And that is when the GoBots made their move. Now, we did an entire GoBots episode that I would highly recommend you go back and watch. But yes, GoBots hit the market a full 6 months before Transformers, and the gang at Hasbro were like, oh, shit. But, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, at this point, they had a lot into this line, and so they had to move forward. Honestly, they weren't too worried because, as it turns out, both lines had things going for them. GoBots were simpler and more affordable, and Transformers were a bit meatier and came with cool accessories. The lines both did very well that first year, but alas, GoBots would significantly drop a few years later, and probably the biggest reason for that was the cartoon series. You see, the GoBots, they did have a cartoon, but it was nothing compared to the Transformers series, which, along with those toys, hit the small screen in 1984. The Transformers, with their well-mapped-out backstory, managed to land in a big way. Kids watched in droves, and the cartoon made you want these toys. I want you to think about the brilliance here. First, the slogan, more than meets the eye. It just adds an air of mystery to these toys. We have a cool sci-fi, futuristic, plot that technically took place in the past, but you get it, whatever. Then we have that iconic Transformer sound effects that we all know, love, and do our version of. Pretty good, right? Yeah, I nailed it. They had multiple points of articulation, and sizes really differed depending on which bot you had. Now, I mentioned 26 initial released figures in 1984. And here they are. Optimus Prime, Megatron, Starscream, Jazz, Blue Streak, Soundwave, Mirage, Ratchet, Skywarp, Hound, Ironhide, Prowl, Thundercracker, Sideswipe, Wheeljack, Trailbreaker, and Sunstreaker. We then had the mini-bots, Bumblebee, Brawn, Cliffjumper, Huffer, Gears, Windcharger, Bumblejumper, and the red Bumblebee and yellow Cliffjumper. Also released in 1984 were the mini-cassettes Laserbeak, Frenzy, Buzzsaw, Ravage, and Rumble, and the 6 mail-in figures, the Omnibots, Camshaft, Downshift, and Overdrive, and the Power Dashers, Drill Dasher, F1 Dasher, and Sky Dasher. So again, that G1 run is considered to be those figures released between 1984 and 1990, and somewhere in the range of 278 figures are believed to be in there, depending on who you ask. Most came from those 2 OG lines, but the figures would go on to borrow from other toy lines when characters were needed. I give you Jetfire. I should also mention that eventually Takara would drop their original Diaclone and Microchange lines in Japan as well in favor of the branded Transformer market, but they weren't gone for good. They would re-release a series of them later. Now, if you need some sort of comprehensive list, I recommend Transformerland.com. You'll see it right there. Seriously, it's a great resource with things broken into years, with photos and things like that. Hey guys, it's time to transform and roll on down to that subscribe button. Please? Seriously, if you could take 2 seconds to blast that subscribe button, maybe hit the thumbs up, it makes a huge difference for the channel, and I thank all of you who have or who are about to do it. You guys rock. So merchandising. I mean, what didn't they have? There were stickers, there were coloring books, there were pencils, party supplies, bed sheets, costumes, clothes, toothbrushes, puzzles, pajamas. You name it, the Transformers probably had it. The cartoon ran for 4 seasons, 98 episodes, with Transformers the movie landing smack dab in the middle of that. Now, that movie hit theaters shortly after season 2 aired, but took place 20 years later in the official timeline. And boy, were we excited. Little did we know what they were about to do to us. Seriously, Transformers traumatized me way more than the Swamp of Sadness. I mean, watching Optimus Prime die? Like, what the Hasbro? Turns out Hasbro wanted to wipe the slate clean and usher in a whole new group of characters so they could sell a whole new group of toys. And so they executed our heroes on screen right in front of us. I actually really enjoy the movie now, a lot more as an adult, of course. But at the time,
emotional damage!
They would, of course, eventually bring Optimus Prime back after receiving thousands of angry letters from us fans, which was a smart move. As you know, the Transformers would continue to thrive even after the original cartoon ended. There would be a number of different cartoon series, including Beast Wars, my friends, which is great, and of course the live-action movies. Some good, some not so good. There was the Netflix War of Cybertron trilogy, which I dug, and if you haven't watched Transformers 1, you absolutely should. With each iteration comes a new batch of figures, all with their standout characters. I, of course, had my favorites, Shockwave, Blaster, Soundwave, and Bumblebee being amongst them. But how about you guys? Let me know in the comments, what were some of your favorite Transformers? By far, this was not an all-encompassing history of Transformers. It has such a rich history that touching on all of it would take just way too long. Still, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Maybe you even learned a little something. And remember, until next time, when it comes to collecting your favorite childhood toys, the hunt, it's still half the fun.